The yacht exploded in a blinding flash, hurling bodies into the savage sea. On shore, Daniel Moore, a man who couldn't afford tomorrow's meal, watched a woman and child wash up like broken dolls. The billionaire heiress everyone thought untouchable now lay dying in his arms. What happens when the poorest man on the coast becomes the only hope for the richest woman in the country? Stay with me until the end of this incredible story and comment your city below. I want to know how far this tale has traveled. The storm arrived without mercy. Daniel Moore stood at the edge of the rotting pier, his weathered hands gripping a makeshift fishing rod fashioned from scrap metal and old rope. The November wind cut through his thin jacket like ice-cold blades, but he couldn't afford to go home empty-handed. Not tonight. Not when his 6-year-old son, Tommy, had eaten nothing but stale bread for 2 days. "Come on," he whispered to the churning waters below. "Just one fish. That's all I'm asking." The waves crashed against the pylons with increasing violence, sending sprays of salt water across his face. Most people had fled inland when the weather warnings came through, but Daniel didn't have that luxury. Storm or no storm, rent was due in 3 days, and Mrs. Chen wouldn't accept another excuse. She'd already given him 2 extensions out of pity for Tommy, but even pity had its limits. Thunder rolled across the sky like God clearing his throat. Daniel glanced at his watch, a broken Timex he wore more out of habit than function. It had stopped working the day his wife died, frozen at 3:47 p.m., the exact moment his world had shattered. That was 2 years ago, but the pain still felt fresh whenever he looked at Tommy's eyes. Sarah's eyes, bright blue and full of trust he wasn't sure he deserved. A flash of lightning illuminated the horizon, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Out there, beyond the breakers, something massive was burning. The flames danced orange and red against the black sky, and even from this distance he could hear the groaning of metal being torn apart. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, dropping his fishing rod. It was a yacht. No, more than that. It was one of those super yachts he'd only seen in magazines at the doctor's office, the kind that cost more than entire neighborhoods. The vessel listed heavily to one side, flames consuming its upper decks, while waves pounded its hull like hungry fists. Daniel's first instinct was to run. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't his problem. Rich people's troubles had nothing to do with him. But then he saw them, figures in the water barely visible between the swells. His feet were moving before his brain could stop them, carrying him down the pier toward the beach. The sand was treacherous in the storm, sucking at his boots with each step. Rain pelted him horizontally, stinging like needles against his exposed skin. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but he kept moving, drawn by something deeper than logic. The first body washed up as he reached the waterline. It was a woman, her designer coat tangled around her like seaweed. Even soaked and unconscious, there was something refined about her features. High cheekbones, professionally styled hair that probably cost more than his monthly food budget. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, mixing with the rain and sea spray. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, his fingers searching for a pulse at her neck. Nothing. No, wait. There. Barely a flutter, like a butterfly's wing against his fingertips. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He tilted her head back, checking her airway. That's when he heard it. A child's cry, weak but unmistakable, coming from the waves. Without thinking, Daniel plunged into the surf. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his muscles scream in protest. A wave crashed over his head, driving him under. Salt water filled his mouth and nose. He came up gasping, searching desperately in the chaos. There, a small form, maybe 30 feet out, appearing and disappearing with each swell. Daniel dove forward, fighting against the current that wanted to drag him out to sea. His clothes weighed him down like anchors, but he kept swimming, kept pushing forward. The child, a girl, couldn't be more than 5, was clinging to a piece of debris, her small fingers white with strain. Her eyes were closed, her lips blue. "I've got you," Daniel said, though his words were swallowed by the storm. He wrapped one arm around her tiny body, using the other to swim back toward shore. Each stroke felt like lifting mountains. His lungs burned, his muscles trembled. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. They tumbled onto the beach in a tangle of limbs and desperation. The girl wasn't breathing. Daniel's hand shook as he started compressions on her small chest, counting out loud to keep himself focused. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, sweetheart." Don't you quit on me. He breathed into her lungs, tasting salt and fear. More compressions. Another breath. The woman nearby still hadn't moved, and Daniel's mind raced with the terrible arithmetic of triage. Save the child first, always save the child first. The girl coughed, a beautiful, ugly sound that brought tears to Daniel's eyes. Water poured from her mouth as she rolled onto her side, gasping and crying. He gathered her against his chest, shielding her from the worst of the rain with his body. It's okay, you're safe now. I've got you. But the woman still wasn't moving. Daniel laid the child down gently, making sure she was breathing steadily, then scrambled back to the unconscious woman. He started CPR immediately, putting all his weight behind each compression. Come on, lady. Your little girl needs you. Push, 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 breathe, push, push, push. His arms ached, his back screamed, but he continued. How long had she been without oxygen? 3 minutes? 5? Brain damage set in after 6 minutes, death after 10. Please, he whispered between compressions. Please. The woman's body convulsed. She turned her head and vomited seawater, then took a massive shuddering breath. Her eyes flew open, green eyes, bright with panic and confusion. My daughter, she gasped. Where is Lily? She's here. She's safe, Daniel assured her, helping her sit up. But we need to get out of this storm. The woman tried to stand and immediately collapsed. Daniel caught her before she hit the sand, noticing how her left ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. Broken, probably. Or severely sprained, at the very least. Can you walk if I help you? She nodded, though her face went pale with the effort. Daniel scooped up the child, Lily, with one arm and supported the woman with the other. Together they stumbled up the beach toward the cluster of fishing shacks that lined the harbor. Daniel's place was the smallest and shabbiest of them all, a converted storage shed he'd managed to make barely livable through desperation and creativity. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and he had to shoulder it open while juggling his 2 charges. Inside it was dark and cold, but at least it was dry. Daniel set Lily down on the narrow cot that served as Tommy's bed, then helped the woman to the only chair, a rescued office chair with duct tape holding the armrest together. Tommy? Daniel called out. You here, buddy? A small face peered out from behind the curtain that separated the sleeping area from the main room. Tommy's eyes went wide when he saw the strangers. Dad? What happened? These folks needed help, Daniel said simply, already moving to light the kerosene heater. They'd run out of heating oil 2 weeks ago, and the kerosene was meant to last until his next paycheck, if he ever got one. Tommy, can you get some of your clothes, the small ones from last year? Tommy nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. He was a good kid, too good, really. He never complained about being hungry, never asked why other kids had things he didn't. It broke Daniel's heart daily. The woman was shivering violently, her expensive coat soaked through. Daniel grabbed the only towels he owned, threadbare things from a thrift store, and handed one to her. We need to get you both into dry clothes, he said. My son's bringing something for your daughter. For you? He looked at her designer outfit, now ruined beyond recognition. I might have something that'll work. Thank you, the woman managed through chattering teeth. I'm Catherine. Catherine Sterling. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Catherine Sterling, even he knew that name. Sterling Industries, Sterling International. The woman who'd made Forbes' list of richest Americans 3 years running. The billionaire whose face graced business magazines and financial news programs. And she was sitting in his leaking shack, wearing his torn towel, depending on his charity to survive. Daniel Moore, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The little one helping out is my son, Tommy. Tommy emerged with an armful of clothes, a faded Spider-Man shirt, and pants he'd outgrown the previous winter. They'd do for Lily. For Catherine, Daniel found his only spare pair of sweatpants and an old Coast Guard sweatshirt he'd bought at Goodwill. The bathroom's through there, he said, pointing to a narrow door. It's not much, but it's perfect, Catherine interrupted, and she seemed to mean it. She limped toward the bathroom, pausing at the doorway. My daughter, I'll take care of her, Daniel promised. While Catherine changed, Daniel carefully dressed the barely conscious Lily in Tommy's old clothes. The boy watched with the serious expression he wore too often for a 6-year-old. Is she going to be okay, Dad? I think so, buddy. She swallowed a lot of water, but she's breathing fine now. What about her dad? Daniel glanced toward the bathroom door, then back at his son. I don't know, Tom. But right now we focus on helping who we can help, okay? Tommy nodded solemnly. He understood loss, understood the absence of a parent. It was written in the empty spaces of their daily lives. Catherine emerged from the bathroom, Daniel's clothes hanging loose on her frame. Even in ill-fitting sweats, there was something regal about her posture, a straight-back defiance against circumstances. How is she? Catherine asked, immediately going to her daughter's side. Sleeping, Daniel said. She needs rest and warmth. Both of you do. Catherine's fingers traced Lily's face with infinite tenderness. She's all I have, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Daniel understood that sentiment perfectly. He glanced at Tommy, who had crawled onto the cot beside Lily, offering his stuffed bear, a ratty thing missing one eye that he treasured above all else. For when she wakes up, Tommy explained quietly. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. That's very kind of you. Tommy knows what it's like to be scared, Daniel said, then immediately wished he hadn't. The last thing this woman needed was his sob story, but Catherine was looking at him with something that wasn't pity. It was understanding. His mother? 2 years ago, cancer. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, Daniel turned away, busying himself with the heater. Life goes on. Except sometimes it didn't feel like life at all. Sometimes it felt like barely managed survival, one crisis away from complete collapse. But he couldn't think about that now, not with 2 more people depending on him. What happened out there, he asked, needing to change the subject. Your yacht. Catherine's face darkened. It wasn't an accident. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Daniel felt the room grow colder despite the heater's efforts. Someone tried to kill me. Yes. Catherine's voice was flat, matter of fact. They almost succeeded. Daniel's mind raced. This was beyond him, beyond his small, struggling world. Attempted murder, billionaires, corporate intrigue. He was a fisherman who couldn't catch fish, a father who couldn't feed his son, and now he was harboring a woman whose enemies had just tried to blow her up. Maybe we should call the police, he suggested. No! Catherine's response was sharp, immediate. She moderated her tone, glancing at the sleeping children. No police. Not yet. I don't know who I can trust. Lady Catherine, with all due respect, you can't stay here. I've got nothing. No security, no... You have something more valuable, she interrupted. You have anonymity. No one would think to look for Catherine Sterling in a place like this. The words stung, even though Daniel knew she hadn't meant them to. A place like this. A hovel. A shack that barely kept the rain out, where the walls were so thin you could hear the neighbors fighting 3 doors down. I can pay you, Catherine continued, misreading his expression. Once I can access my accounts. I didn't pull you out of the water for money, Daniel said quietly. Catherine studied him for a long moment. No, she said finally. I don't suppose you did. A loud bang against the door made them both jump. Daniel moved instinctively, positioning himself between the door and the others. His heart hammered against his ribs. Danny boy, you in there? The voice was slurred, aggressive. Rick Sampson, the local drunk who also happened to deal drugs out of his fishing boat when he thought the coast was clear. Saw you down at the beach, saw what you pulled in. Daniel's blood ran cold. If Rick had seen them, who else might have? Go away, Rick. Nothing here concerns you. Now that ain't neighborly, Danny. Not neighborly at all. Something scraped against the door. Probably Rick's knife. He liked to play with it when he was drunk. Thought it made him intimidating. Pretty fancy stuff washing up tonight. Expensive stuff. Might be a reward for finding it. Catherine had gone very still, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. Tommy pressed against Daniel's leg, trembling. I said go away, Rick. Or what? Rick laughed, an ugly sound. You gonna make me? You can't even make rent, Danny boy. But maybe I can help with that. Maybe we can share whatever windfall you got in there. The doorknob rattled. The lock, such as it was, wouldn't hold if Rick really wanted in. Daniel grabbed the baseball bat he kept behind the door, his father's old Louisville slugger, the only thing of value he'd inherited. Last warning, Rick. I'm shaking in my boots, Rick sneered, but Daniel heard his footsteps retreat. This ain't over, Danny. You remember that. Rick Sampson, don't forget. They waited in tense silence until they were sure he was gone. Daniel's hands were shaking as he set the bat down. I'm sorry, Catherine said softly. I'm putting you in danger just by being here. Rick's an asshole, but he's mostly talk. Daniel hoped that was true. Besides, you're not going anywhere on that ankle tonight. As if to emphasize his point, the storm picked up again, rattling the windows in their frames. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like gunfire. Dad? Tommy's voice was small. I'm hungry. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He'd been so focused on the rescue, on the immediate crisis, he'd forgotten the original problem. They had no food, the fishing had yielded nothing, and now he had 2 more mouths to feed. I know, buddy, I'll figure something out. Catherine was watching him, and Daniel saw the moment she understood. Her gaze traveled around the sparse room, taking in the empty shelves, the lack of a refrigerator, the way Tommy's clothes were all clearly secondhand and too small. You don't have any food, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel's jaw tightened. We manage. When was the last time your son ate a proper meal? We manage, Daniel repeated, harder this time. Catherine reached for her coat, still dripping in the corner. She pulled out what looked like a waterlogged wallet. There's a credit card, she said. It might still work. We could order. With what phone? What address? Daniel gestured around the room. You think delivery drivers come here? You think I have internet for online orders? The gulf between their worlds had never been more apparent. Catherine Sterling lived in a universe where problems were solved with phone calls and credit cards. Daniel lived in one where problems accumulated like compound interest, each one making the next harder to solve. I'm sorry, Catherine said again. I'm not thinking clearly. Lily stirred on the cot, whimpering in her sleep. Both parents moved at once, but Catherine reached her first, smoothing her daughter's hair and humming something soft and wordless. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, and Daniel found himself thinking of Sarah, of all the lullabies that had died with her. There's a vending machine, Tommy said suddenly, at the marina office. Sometimes when people leave quarters in the payphone, He stopped, looking guilty. It's okay, Tom, Daniel said, though the idea of his son scavenging for lost quarters made him want to punch walls. That's smart thinking. He dug through his pockets, finding a crumpled dollar bill and 37 cents in change. Not enough for much, but maybe enough for something. I'll go, he said. In this storm? Catherine looked skeptical. I've been through worse. That was a lie, but she didn't need to know that. Daniel pulled on his still-soaked jacket, grimacing at the cold, wet fabric against his skin. Lock the door behind me, he instructed. Don't open it for anyone except me. Daniel, Catherine started, but he was already stepping out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him over immediately. Rain came at him sideways, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The marina office was only 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. Daniel fought for every step, his body already exhausted from the rescue. The vending machine sat in the covered walkway outside the marina office, its lights flickering like a beacon in the darkness. Daniel fed in his money carefully, aware that this was literally his last dollar. He got 2 bags of chips and a candy bar. Not exactly nutritious, but calories were calories. On the way back, he saw them. 2 men in dark suits, completely out of place in the ramshackle marina. They moved systematically from boat to boat, shining flashlights despite the storm. Professional, deliberate, looking for something, looking for someone. Daniel ducked behind a dumpster, his heart racing. The men were getting closer to the row of shacks. In maybe 10 minutes, they'd reach his door. He waited until they turned their backs, then sprinted for his shack, not caring about the noise his footsteps made in the puddles. He burst through the door, startling everyone inside. We have to go, he gasped. Now. Catherine's face went pale. They found me? 2 men, suits. They're searching every boat and building. Where can we go? Catherine tried to stand, wincing as weight hit her injured ankle. Daniel's mind raced. The shack had no back door, no window large enough to climb through. They were trapped unless... The maintenance tunnel, Tommy said. Dad, remember? You showed me the old maintenance tunnel under the pier. Daniel had forgotten about that. It was from the marina's better days when they actually maintained things. The tunnel ran from the storage area beneath the marina office all the way to the old boat launch. It would be flooded in this storm, but maybe not completely. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. "Staying here seems worse," Catherine said, already gathering Lily into her arms. Daniel grabbed the baseball bat and the small emergency flashlight he kept for power outages, which happened frequently. He wrapped the meager food in a plastic bag and shoved it in his pocket. "Tommy, you stay close to me. Catherine, I can manage." They slipped out of the shack, keeping to the shadows. Daniel led them away from the searching men, toward the marina office. The entrance to the maintenance tunnel was hidden behind a pile of old crab traps and broken buoys. Daniel pulled the debris aside, revealing a rusted metal hatch. It protested loudly as he hauled it open, and he froze, certain the men must have heard. But the storm swallowed the sound just as it swallowed everything else. The tunnel was exactly as bad as he'd feared. Water stood knee-deep at the entrance, and he could hear more rushing in from somewhere ahead. The flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness. "I'll go first," Daniel said. "Test if it's passable. Tommy, you hold on to my belt. Catherine, I'm right behind you." They descended into the tunnel. The water was shockingly cold, making Tommy gasp. Daniel lifted his son, carrying him despite the extra strain on his already exhausted body. Behind him, he could hear Catherine struggling with Lily's weight and her injured ankle. The tunnel was a nightmare of rust and decay. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping unknown substances. The water grew deeper as they progressed, rising to Daniel's waist. He kept the flashlight aimed ahead, watching for obstacles or, God forbid, a complete flood. Something splashed in the darkness behind them. Catherine made a small sound of fear. "Just rats," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure. "Keep moving." The tunnel seemed endless. Daniel's arms burned from carrying Tommy. His legs shook from fighting against the current. More than once he thought about giving up, about telling Catherine this was insane, they should take their chances with the men above. But then he thought about what kind of people tried to blow up a yacht with a child aboard, and he kept moving. Finally, blessed, they saw light ahead, the exit near the old boat launch. Daniel pushed toward it, his body running on nothing but determination now. The exit hatch was partially submerged but functional. Daniel pushed it open and helped Tommy climb out, then turned to assist Catherine. She passed Lily up first, then accepted his hand, gripping it with surprising strength as he pulled her from the tunnel. They emerged behind the old boat launch, hidden from view by abandoned equipment and overgrown brush. The storm still raged, but somehow it felt less oppressive in the open air. "There's an old boat shed about a quarter-mile up the beach," Daniel said, breathing hard. "No one uses it anymore. We can hide there until—" A flashlight beam cut through the rain, sweeping toward them. They all dropped flat against the ground, pressing into the mud and grass. The beam passed over them once, twice, then moved on. "Go, go, go," Daniel whispered. They ran, or in Catherine's case, limped quickly, along the beach, staying low. The boat shed materialized from the storm like something from a nightmare. Its walls more gaps than wood, its roof half caved in. But it was shelter. Inside, they collapsed against the driest wall they could find. Everyone was shivering, soaked through, pushed beyond exhaustion. Daniel distributed the chips and candy bar, watching as Tommy tried to eat slowly despite his hunger. Catherine broke off tiny pieces for Lily, who was conscious but quiet, shock making her compliant. "Those men," Daniel said quietly, "they're not going to stop looking." "No," Catherine agreed, "they won't." "Who are they? Who wants you dead badly enough to do this?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke. "My husband, my ex-husband, Marcus Webb." The name was vaguely familiar to Daniel, something from newspaper headlines he'd glimpsed but never read. "We're in the middle of a custody battle for Lily. It's gotten ugly. Billions of dollars are at stake, but more than that, control of Sterling Industries. If I die, Marcus gets everything, the company, the assets, and most importantly, Lily." "He'd kill his own daughter's mother?" Catherine's laugh was bitter. "Marcus doesn't see people. He sees opportunities. Lily is an opportunity, an heir he can mold, a fortune he can control. I'm an obstacle. But surely the police, Marcus owns half the judges in the state. His connections run deep. Any investigation would be bungled. Evidence would disappear. He'd console our daughter at my funeral while counting my money. Daniel felt sick. This was beyond anything in his experience. His problems, poverty, hunger, survival, suddenly seemed simple compared to this world of calculated murder and bottomless greed. "Why did you marry him?" The question slipped out before Daniel could stop it. "Sorry, that's none of my—" "It's fine. I asked myself the same question." Catherine pulled Lily closer, the little girl curling into her mother's warmth. "He was different once. Or maybe he was always the same, and I was too young and stupid to see it. When you grow up with money, you think it insulates you from certain kinds of evil. You're wrong." Daniel thought about Sarah, about how he'd known from their first date that she was the one. They'd had nothing, were nothing by the world's standards, but they'd had each other, until they didn't. "My wife never got to see Tommy start school," he said, surprising himself by speaking. "She fought so hard to stay alive for that. Made me promise I'd take pictures." He swallowed hard. "I did. Took pictures of everything that first day. Then came home and cried for 3 hours." Catherine reached over and squeezed his hand. Her fingers were ice cold but somehow comforting. "What do we do now?" Tommy asked in a small voice. The candy bar had done little to ease his hunger, but he hadn't complained. "We survived the night," Daniel said. "In the morning—" The door to the shed exploded inward. Rick Sampson stood there, no longer drunk, his eyes sharp with greed. Behind him were the 2 men in suits. "Well, well," Rick said, that knife of his gleaming in his hand. "Look what we have here. Danny boy playing hero." Daniel stood slowly, pushing Tommy behind him, gripping the baseball bat. "Rick, you don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I think I do. These gentlemen are looking for some lost property, paying good money for information." Rick's smile was ugly. "Real good money." One of the suited men stepped forward. He had the kind of face you forgot immediately, except for his eyes. His eyes were dead, like a shark's. "Mrs. Webb," the man said calmly, "your husband is worried about you. Let's get you and your daughter somewhere safe." "Stay away from us," Catherine said, but her voice shook. Now, no need for unpleasantness." The man's hand moved to his jacket, and Daniel knew with terrible certainty that there was a gun under there. "Take me," Catherine said suddenly. "Leave Lily here. Please, I'll come with you. I won't fight. Just leave my daughter." "I'm afraid that's not the arrangement," the man said. Daniel moved before he'd fully formed the thought. The baseball bat connected with Rick's wrist, sending the knife flying. Rick screamed, clutching his broken wrist, but Daniel was already pivoting toward the suited men. The gun came out, as expected. But the quarters Daniel had spent in the batting cages before Tommy was born, back when he'd had quarters to spend, hadn't been wasted. The bat caught the gunman's hand, sending the weapon spinning into the darkness. "Run!" Daniel shouted. Catherine grabbed Lily and ran, her injured ankle forgotten in the adrenaline surge. Tommy was right behind her. The second suited man moved to follow, but Daniel body-checked him into the wall. Old wood splintered, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs. The man was trained, professional. His fist caught Daniel's jaw, snapping his head back. Stars exploded across his vision. Another blow to his ribs drove the air from his lungs. But Daniel had grown up in foster homes and fishing docks. He fought dirty because that's the only way he'd ever learned. His elbow found the man's throat. His knee found softer targets. When the man gasped, Daniel grabbed a handful of sand and threw it in his eyes, then brought the bat down on his shoulder with a sickening crack. The first gunman was recovering, searching for his weapon in the darkness. Rick was curled on the ground, still moaning about his wrist. Daniel didn't wait to see how things would play out. He ran. He found them huddled behind an overturned boat about 50 yards down the beach. Catherine was holding both children, trying to shield them from the rain and the horror of what they'd just witnessed. "We have to keep moving," Daniel gasped, tasting blood from his split lip. "Where? Where can we possibly go?" Daniel's mind raced. They needed somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses, but everything was closed because of the storm. Except the emergency shelter at St. Mary's Church. They open whenever there's severe weather. There'll be people there, volunteers, witnesses. It was a long shot. St. Mary's was 2 miles away, and they'd have to go through the town to get there. But staying on the beach was suicide. They moved through the storm-lashed streets like ghosts. Daniel led them through alleys he'd learned during his homeless period after Sarah's death, before he'd found the shack, behind dumpsters, through abandoned lots, under bridges where the desperate gathered. Lily had gone silent, her eyes wide with shock. Tommy held her hand as they walked, two children bound by trauma they should never have experienced. Catherine limped steadily beside Daniel, her jaw set with determination. They were 3 blocks from St. Mary's when the SUV found them. It came around the corner fast, tires squealing on wet asphalt. Daniel shoved everyone into an alcove as the vehicle's doors opened and men poured out, not just the 2 from before, but 4 more. "End of the line, Mr. Moore," one called out. They knew his name. Of course they did. "Hand over Mrs. Webb and the child, and you and your boy walk away. This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," Daniel shouted back. "We're authorized to pay you $50,000 for your cooperation," the man continued. "Cash. Right now. Think what that could do for your son." $50,000. Enough to pay rent for years. Enough to feed Tommy properly, get him new clothes, maybe even save something for college. All he had to do was step aside and let these men take a mother and child to their deaths. Daniel looked at Tommy, his son's eyes wide with fear but also trust, complete trust that his father would do the right thing. "Go to hell," Daniel called back. "Have it your way." They came at once, professionally covering each other's angles. Daniel knew they couldn't win this. Not against 6 men, probably armed, certainly trained, but he raised the bat anyway, stepped in front of the others anyway, because that's what you did. You stood between evil and innocence, even when you knew you'd lose. That's when they heard the sirens. Multiple sirens, getting closer. The men hesitated, looking at their leader for guidance. In that moment of distraction, Daniel saw their chance. "Now!" he shouted, and they ran for St. Mary's. The church doors were open, spilling warm light into the storm. They burst inside, startling the handful of homeless people and volunteers in the main hall. Father Miguel, who'd known Daniel since his darkest days, took one look at them and understood immediately that something was very wrong. "Sanctuary?" Daniel gasped. "We claim sanctuary." It was an ancient rite, probably not legally binding, but Father Miguel didn't hesitate. "Of course," he said loudly, for everyone to hear. "All are welcome in God's house." The men in suits appeared in the doorway, but they stopped at the threshold. Too many witnesses now. Too many complications. The lead man stared at Daniel with those dead shark eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Then they melted back into the storm. Daniel's legs gave out. He sat hard on the floor, the baseball bat rolling from numb fingers. They were safe. For now. Catherine was crying, holding Lily so tight the girl squeaked in protest. Tommy stood uncertainly between his father and the others, not sure where he belonged in this strange new dynamic. "Dad," he said, "are we okay now?" Daniel didn't know how to answer that. They were alive. They were together. But okay? How could anything be okay when killers hunted children, when money mattered more than lives, when his son had to watch his father fight for their lives? "We're safe, buddy," he said finally. "That's what matters." Father Miguel was already moving, organizing blankets and hot soup, creating a protective bubble around them with nothing but kindness and moral authority. The other people in the shelter, societies discarded and forgotten, closed ranks too, understanding without being told that these newcomers were running from something terrible. Catherine looked at Daniel across the church hall, her billion-dollar eyes meeting his empty pocket gaze. "Thank you," she mouthed. Daniel nodded, then closed his eyes and let exhaustion take him for just a moment. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in it, evil men made new plans. But for right now, in this moment, 2 children were safe. 2 parents had fought for them and won. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. The night stretched ahead, full of uncertainty and danger. But Daniel had learned long ago that you face life one crisis at a time, one day at a time, one breath at a time if necessary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Marcus Webb wouldn't give up. The men would return. The struggle would continue. But tonight, in a church that smelled of old wood and hope, 4 broken people had found each other. And sometimes, in the midst of the storm, that was its own kind of miracle. Daniel opened his eyes to find Tommy curled against his side, already asleep despite everything. Across the room, Catherine held Lily, singing that haunting lullaby again. Their eyes met once more and something passed between them. Not quite understanding, not yet trust, but perhaps the beginning of both. The storm would pass, the sun would rise, and when it did, Daniel Moore, failed fisherman, struggling father, unexpected protector, would be ready for whatever came next. He had to be. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's, painting rainbow patterns across the floor where Daniel had spent the night keeping watch. His body ached in places he'd forgotten existed, and his split lip had swollen to twice its normal size, but he hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep. Every sound outside the church had sent his heart racing. Every shadow past the windows had looked like men in suits, returning to finish what they'd started. Catherine stirred on the pew where she'd finally dozed off around 4 a.m. Lily still clutched protectively against her chest. The little girl's breathing was steady now, no longer the ragged gasps from when they'd first pulled her from the water. Tommy had curled up beneath one of Father Miguel's donated blankets, his small hand still gripping the hem of Daniel's jacket, even in sleep. "You should have rested," Catherine said softly, her voice hoarse. "Someone needed to stay alert," Daniel replied, though the truth was more complicated. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd seen those dead shark eyes, heard Rick's knife scraping against his door, felt the weight of that gun pointed at children. Father Miguel approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee, his weathered face creased with concern. "The storm has passed," he said quietly, glancing toward the windows. "But I suspect your troubles haven't." "No," Catherine admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "They'll be back. Marcus won't stop until—" She cut herself off, looking at the sleeping children. "Perhaps it's time to involve the authorities properly," Father Miguel suggested. "I have a friend in the state police, someone who can't be bought—" "With respect, Father," Catherine interrupted gently, "you don't understand the reach Marcus has. State police, FBI, judges, he has people everywhere. The moment I surface officially, I'll have an accident. Lily will have an accident. The only reason we're alive right now is because we're off the grid." Daniel watched this exchange while his mind worked through the problem like he was trying to untangle fishing line. In his world, problems were usually simple, even when they were hard. No money meant find work, no food meant find food. But this was different. This was a chess game where the other player owned most of the board. "There has to be someone," he said finally. "Someone your ex-husband can't touch." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. "Maybe," she said slowly. "There's a journalist, Amanda Chen. She's been investigating Marcus for years, trying to expose his connections to organized crime. If I could get to her, get our story out publicly." "Where is she?" Daniel asked. "Boston. She works for the Globe." Boston. It might as well have been the moon. Daniel had 17 cents in his pocket after spending his last dollar on those vending machine snacks. His truck had been repossessed 3 months ago. They had no money, no transportation, and no way to get to Boston without being tracked. "I have money," Catherine said, reading his expression. "Not on me, but I have accounts Marcus doesn't know about. Emergency funds I've been hiding during the divorce proceedings. If we could get to a bank—" "They'll be watching the banks," Daniel pointed out. "The moment you try to access anything, they'll know where you are." Catherine's shoulders sagged. For the first time since he'd pulled her from the water, she looked defeated. "You're right. Of course you're right." Tommy stirred, blinking awake with that disoriented look children get when they wake up somewhere unfamiliar. His stomach growled audibly, and Daniel felt that familiar stab of parental inadequacy. "I'm hungry, Dad," Tommy whispered, as if apologizing for the basic need. "I know, buddy. We'll figure something out." Father Miguel stood. "I'll see what I can arrange for breakfast. We have some cereal, milk, perhaps some fruit." As the priest walked away, Daniel caught Catherine watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked. "You haven't eaten either," she observed. "You gave everything to the children last night. They needed it more. When's the last time you ate? Really ate?" Daniel didn't answer, but Catherine seemed to read it in his face anyway. This is my fault, she said. I've brought this danger to you, and you already had— Stop, Daniel said firmly. I made a choice. I'd make it again. Why? The question seemed to burst from her. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You could have taken their money, $50,000, and no one would have blamed you. Daniel looked at his son, who was now sitting up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Because someday I want my son to look at me and see someone worth respecting. Can't put a price on that. Before Catherine could respond, Lily woke with a cry. Not the normal waking sounds of a child, but a terrified wail that made everyone in the shelter turn to look. Mommy! Mommy! The little girl was thrashing, caught in some nightmare. Catherine immediately pulled her close, rocking her. I'm here, baby. Mommy's here. The water, Lily sobbed. The water was everywhere and the boat was on fire and Daddy said— Catherine went very still. Daddy was there? Lily nodded against her mother's shoulder, her whole body shaking. He was on the boat. Before the fire. He said we were going on an adventure. Daniel saw the implications hit Catherine like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just ordered the attack. He'd been there. He'd put his own daughter on that yacht knowing what was going to happen. That son of a bitch, Daniel muttered, then caught himself. Sorry, Father. Father Miguel, returning with a tray of food, shook his head grimly. Some sins require stronger language than others, my son. They ate in tense silence, the children picking at their cereal while the adults tried to process this new information. If Marcus Webb had been willing to risk his own daughter's life to eliminate Catherine, then there were truly no lines he wouldn't cross. We need to move, Daniel said finally. They know we're in the area. It's only a matter of time before they start checking every shelter, church, and hiding spot. But where can we go? Catherine asked. Daniel had been thinking about this all night, turning over possibilities like stones, looking for something, anything that might work. And he kept coming back to one idea. Crazy. Probably stupid, but maybe just unexpected enough to work. My cousin Eddie, he said slowly. He runs a fishing charter out of Gloucester. If we could get to him, he could maybe take us up the coast to Boston by boat. Won't they be watching the harbors? The big ones, sure. But Eddie works out of a small private dock. And he owes me. Daniel didn't mention what Eddie owed him for, taking the fall for Eddie's drunk driving charge 10 years ago, doing 3 months in county jail so Eddie wouldn't lose his captain's license. It had cost Daniel his own job at the cannery, started the downward spiral that led to this moment. But family was family. How do we get to Gloucester? Catherine asked. That was the problem Daniel had been wrestling with all night. Gloucester was 30 miles away. In good weather, without anyone hunting them, it would still be a challenge. Now, it seemed impossible. I might be able to help with that, Father Miguel said quietly. They all turned to look at him. There's a van, the priest continued. It belongs to the church, used for youth group trips. It's old, unreliable, but it runs. And I seem to have misplaced the keys. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and set them on the table. How careless of me. I probably won't even notice it's missing until this evening. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Father, if they find out you helped us, then I'll tell them the truth, that I gave sanctuary to a woman and children in need. Let them explain to the media why they're harassing a priest for practicing Christian charity. Daniel took the keys, his hand shaking slightly. It had been so long since anyone had helped him without wanting something in return that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like. The van's in the back lot, Father Miguel said. Blue, with St. Mary's Youth Ministry painted on the side. Try not to draw attention to it. They prepared to leave quickly, gathering what little they had. Father Miguel found some old clothes in the donation box, a coat for Catherine that actually fit, shoes for Lily to replace the ones lost in the water. One of the other shelter residents, an elderly woman who'd been watching everything with sharp eyes, pressed a $20 bill into Daniel's hand. For gas, she said simply, and don't argue. I know what it's like to run with children. Daniel wanted to refuse. He'd already taken so much charity, but something in the woman's face stopped him. She needed to help as much as they needed the help. They slipped out the back door of the church into a morning that seemed impossibly bright after the storm. The parking lot was mostly empty. puddles reflecting the sky like broken mirrors. The van sat in the corner exactly as Father Miguel had described, blue, rusty, with optimistic religious slogans painted on the sides. "This is our getaway vehicle?" Catherine asked, a hint of humor in her voice despite everything. "Not what you're used to, I'm guessing," Daniel said, unlocking the doors. "You'd be surprised," Catherine replied, helping the children into the back. "I didn't always have money. My father was a mechanic in Detroit. I grew up riding in vehicles held together with duct tape and prayer." This revelation surprised Daniel. He'd assumed she'd been born into wealth, had never known what it was like to count pennies for gas. "How did you—" he started, then stopped. "Sorry, none of my business." "It's fine," Catherine said, settling into the passenger seat as Daniel started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, then caught with a roar that made him wince. So much for subtle. "I got a scholarship to MIT, studied computer engineering, started a software company in my dorm room that got bought by Sterling Industries. Richard Sterling took a personal interest in my career." Her voice softened. "He became my mentor, then my father-in-law when I married his son Marcus." "Sterling wasn't Marcus's original name?" "No. Richard adopted him as an adult, some tax thing I never fully understood. Should have been my first warning sign. What kind of man changes his son's last name for a tax break?" She stared out the window as Daniel navigated carefully out of the parking lot. "Richard died 2 years ago. Heart attack. That's when Marcus showed his true colors." Daniel checked the mirrors constantly as he drove, looking for SUVs, for men in suits, for any sign they were being followed. The streets were mostly empty this early on a Saturday morning, especially after the storm. Debris littered the roads, branches, trash, pieces of buildings that hadn't weathered well. "Dad, where are we going?" Tommy asked from the back seat. "To see Cousin Eddie, remember him? The one who smells like fish?" Despite everything, Daniel found himself smiling. "That's the one." "I like fish," Lily said quietly, the first normal thing she'd said since waking. "Then you'll love Eddie," Tommy told her seriously. "He smells like all the fish." The children's innocent conversation filled the van as Daniel navigated through town, taking back roads and alleys he'd learned during his delivery driver days. Before that job, too, had disappeared. Catherine kept watch on the passenger side, her body tense, ready for trouble. They were 10 miles out of town when they saw the roadblock. It was subtle, not an official police checkpoint, just 2 SUVs parked in a way that narrowed the road to a single lane. Men in suits stood beside the vehicles, checking each car that passed. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "There's a turnoff," Catherine said urgently, pointing to a dirt road ahead. "There." Daniel took the turn harder than he should have, the van's tires skidding on the still wet dirt. The road was barely more than a trail, probably used by hunters or teenagers looking for privacy. Branches scraped against the van's sides as they bounced over ruts and rocks. "Are they following?" Daniel asked, unable to see much in the mirrors except dust and vegetation. Catherine turned in her seat, watching behind them. "I don't... Wait, yes, 1 SUV. Daniel pressed harder on the gas, though the van protested with alarming noises. The dirt road forked ahead, and he chose left on instinct, plunging them deeper into the woods. The children had gone quiet in the back, sensing the adults' fear. The road ended abruptly at an old quarry, the ground dropping away into a water-filled pit that storm had turned brown with runoff. Daniel slammed on the brakes, the van sliding to a stop just yards from the edge. "Dead end," he said unnecessarily. The SUV appeared behind them, blocking the narrow road. 2 men got out, moving with that same professional confidence Daniel had come to recognize. There was nowhere to run this time. "Stay in the van," Daniel told everyone, grabbing the baseball bat. "Lock the doors after me." "Daniel, no," Catherine started. But he was already out, standing between the van and the approaching men. The bat felt inadequate in his hands, like bringing a stick to a gunfight, which was exactly what he was doing. "Mr. Moore," one of the men said, stopping about 10 feet away. "This has gone on long enough. You're endangering those children." "Funny," Daniel replied, adjusting his grip on the bat. "I was thinking the same about you. We're not going to hurt the girl. She's valuable to Mr. Webb. The boy, too. We have no interest in harming your son." "Just Catherine, then?" The man's silence was answer enough. Then you'll have to go through me, Daniel said simply. The man sighed, reaching into his jacket. I was hoping to avoid this. But instead of a gun, he pulled out a phone. He typed something quickly, then held it up. On the screen was a video, grainy security footage of Tommy at school playing on the playground. We know where your son goes to school, the man said calmly. We know you walk him there every morning at 7:45. We know he stays for aftercare until 5:30 because you can't afford regular daycare. We know his teacher's name is Miss Patterson, and his best friend is a kid named Jorge. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Here's what's going to happen, the man continued. You're going to get back in that van and drive away. You're going to forget you ever met Catherine Sterling, and in return, your son gets to grow up. He gets to go to school safely. He gets to have a future. The threat hung in the air like poison. Daniel looked back at the van, saw Tommy's face pressed against the window, those trusting eyes watching his father. You're asking me to let you murder a woman, Daniel said. I'm offering you a chance to save your son. Daniel stood there, bat in his hands, the weight of an impossible choice crushing him. Save strangers or protect his son. Be a hero or be a father, the kind of choice no one should ever have to make. That's when they heard the sirens. Not one or two, but many, growing louder. The men turned, confused, and Daniel saw his chance. He swung the bat, catching the closer man in the stomach, doubling him over. Then he was running for the van, yanking the door open. "Everyone out!" he shouted. "Into the woods! Now!" They piled out of the van, Catherine carrying Lily, Daniel grabbing Tommy, and plunged into the forest just as 3 state police cars came roaring up the dirt road, boxing in the SUV. Daniel didn't stop to see what happened next. He ran, branches tearing at his clothes. Tommy's hand gripped tight in his. Behind them, he could hear shouting, orders being given, but he just kept running deeper into the woods. They finally stopped in a small clearing, everyone gasping for breath. Daniel could hear the commotion back at the quarry, but it was distant now, muffled by the trees. "How?" Catherine gasped. "How did the police know?" Daniel pulled out the ancient flip phone Father Miguel had slipped into his pocket, along with the van keys. On the screen was a single text sent to 911. Armed kidnapping in progress. Old Quarry Road, blue church van. Send units immediately. Father Miguel, Daniel said, showing her the phone. He must have known they'd catch up to us. Gave us a way to call for help. But won't the police take us in for questioning, probably, Daniel admitted. But it's better than... A branch cracked behind them. They all spun around to find a man standing there. Not one of the suited professionals, but Rick Sampson, his wrist in a makeshift sling, his good hand holding a gun that shook with rage and withdrawal. "Thought you were clever, didn't you, Danny boy?" Rick's eyes were wild, desperate. "Cost me a big payday. Cost me everything." "Rick, put the gun down," Daniel said carefully, pushing Tommy behind him. 50,000, they offered. 50,000 just to point them your way. But no, you had to play hero. You had to break my wrist. Rick's gun swung wildly between them. Now the cops are here. Those men are probably getting arrested, and I got nothing. Nothing. Rick, listen. No, you listen. Rick stepped closer, the gun steadying on Daniel. I'm done being the joke. Done being the local drunk everyone looks down on. That money was my way out, and you took it from me. Daniel saw Rick's finger tightening on the trigger and knew with terrible clarity that this was it. After everything, it would be Rick Sampson who ended this. Rick, who he'd known since high school. Rick, who'd once been just another fisherman trying to make a living before the drugs and alcohol took over. "Wait," Catherine stepped forward. "I'll pay you." Rick's attention shifted to her. "What?" "The 50,000. I'll pay you double. 100,000. Cash." Rick laughed, ugly and bitter. "Lady, in case you haven't noticed, we're standing in the middle of the woods. You gonna pull 100 grand out of your—" "I have offshore accounts," Catherine said calmly, though Daniel could see her hands shaking. "Numbered accounts in the Caymans that Marcus doesn't know about. I can transfer the money to you right now if you have a smartphone." "I look like I have a smartphone?" Rick snarled. "I can barely afford a flip phone." "Then we go together to a library. Use their computers. 1 hour, Rick. 1 hour, and you have your 100,000. Rick wavered. greed fighting with rage and desperation. The gun dropped slightly. That's when Tommy stepped out from behind Daniel. "Mr. Rick," the boy said in his small voice, "are you going to hurt my dad?" Something in Rick's face changed, looking at Tommy. Maybe he remembered being 6 years old himself before life had beaten him down. Maybe he saw Daniel at that age, back when they'd been friends, had played together on these same beaches. The gun lowered completely. "No, kid," Rick said quietly. "No, I'm not." Then the police were there, crashing through the underbrush, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Rick dropped the gun, raised his hands, and Daniel saw something like relief in his eyes as they cuffed him. More officers appeared, surrounding them, and Daniel recognized one, Detective Sarah Walsh, who'd worked his wife's case when she'd first gotten sick, and they'd thought someone had poisoned her. It had turned out to be cancer, not murder, but Walsh had been kind through it all. "Daniel Moore," she said, her expression unreadable. "You want to tell me what's going on here?" Daniel looked at Catherine, at the children clinging to their parents, at the woods around them where they'd nearly died multiple times in the last 12 hours. "It's a long story," he said finally. "I've got time," Walsh replied, "and something tells me it's going to be worth hearing." They were led back through the woods to the quarry, now swarming with police cars and ambulances. The men in suits were in custody, their SUV being searched. The church van sat abandoned, its doors still open from their desperate escape. "Dad," Tommy tugged at Daniel's hand. "Are we in trouble?" "No, buddy," Daniel said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "We're just going to tell the nice officers what happened." "Everything?" Daniel looked down at his son, this little boy who'd seen too much, been through too much, and somehow still trusted that the world made sense. "Everything," Daniel confirmed. As they were led to separate police cars for transport to the station, Catherine caught Daniel's arm. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "thank you. You saved our lives." "We saved each other," Daniel corrected. She squeezed his arm, then allowed herself to be led away, Lily clutched against her chest. Daniel watched them go, wondering if this was the end of their strange connection, if Catherine Sterling would disappear back into her world of billions and boardrooms, while he returned to his shack by the harbor. But as he helped Tommy into their assigned police car, he caught Catherine looking back at him through the window of hers. She pressed her hand against the glass, and he understood the message. "This isn't over. We're not done yet." The police car pulled away from the quarry, leaving behind the scene of their desperate escape. Tommy leaned against Daniel's side, exhausted by the ordeal. "Dad?" the boy said quietly. "Are they good people? Catherine and Lily?" Daniel thought about the question, about how to explain that good and bad were sometimes complicated, that people were more than their bank accounts or their problems. "Yeah, buddy," he said finally. "They're good people in a bad situation." "Like us?" The simple truth of that statement hit Daniel hard. They were all just people in bad situations, trying to survive, trying to protect their children, trying to find some small piece of safety in a dangerous world. "Exactly like us," Daniel agreed. The police station loomed ahead, and with it, hours of questions and explanations. But Daniel found himself oddly calm. They were alive, they were safe, at least for now. And somehow, in the midst of running for their lives, two broken families had found each other. Detective Walsh would want the whole story, from the beginning, and Daniel would tell it. The rescue from the storm, the men hunting Catherine, Marcus Webb's involvement, all of it. But what he wouldn't be able to explain, what he barely understood himself, was how saving a stranger on a beach had changed everything. The police car pulled into the station's parking garage, and Daniel saw another car already there, Catherine and Lily being helped out, escorted inside. Catherine looked back, finding him across the distance, and nodded once. A promise, maybe, or just acknowledgement of what they'd been through together. Tommy squeezed Daniel's hand as they got out of the car. "What happens now, Dad?" It was the question Daniel had been asking himself since the moment he'd pulled Catherine from the waves. He still didn't have an answer, but for the first time in 2 years since Sarah's death, he felt something that might have been hope. "I don't know, buddy," he said honestly, "but we'll face it together." They walked into the police station, Tommy's small hand in his, ready to tell their story, ready for whatever came next. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the soft morning sun, and the institutional smell reminded Daniel of hospitals, of the worst days of his life. But this wasn't an ending. As Detective Walsh led them to an interview room, as Tommy pressed closer to his side, as he caught one more glimpse of Catherine being led down a different hallway, Daniel understood that clearly. This was just the beginning of something larger, something that would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Marcus Webb was still out there. The danger hadn't passed. And two families from different worlds had been thrown together by violence and circumstance, bound now by shared trauma and mutual survival. The interview room smelled like burnt coffee and fear sweat from countless previous occupants. Daniel sat across from Detective Walsh, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm water, while Tommy dozed on the uncomfortable plastic chair beside him. They'd been here for 3 hours now, going through every detail of the last 24 hours, and Daniel's voice was getting hoarse from talking. "So you're telling me," Walsh said, reviewing her notes, "that Marcus Webb, one of the richest men in the state, tried to murder his ex-wife and daughter by blowing up their yacht?" "That's what Catherine told me. And Lily, the little girl, she said her father was on the boat before it exploded." Walsh tapped her pen against the table, a rhythmic sound that made Daniel want to scream. Through the small window in the door, he could see officers moving back and forth, the normal business of a police station continuing while his whole world had been turned upside down. "The men we arrested aren't talking," Walsh said finally. "They've all lawyered up. Expensive lawyers, too, from Boston." "Webb's paying for them?" "Someone is." Walsh leaned back in her chair, studying Daniel with those cop eyes that seemed to see everything. "You know what you've gotten yourself into here?" "I pulled a woman and her kid from the water," Daniel said firmly. "That's all I know." Walsh's expression softened slightly. "How's Tommy handling all this?" Daniel glanced at his sleeping son. "He's tougher than he should have to be." "Kids always are." Walsh stood, stretching her back. "I'm going to talk to Mrs. Sterling again. Compare stories. You two sit tight." She left them alone in the interview room, and Daniel felt the weight of exhaustion settling over him like a heavy blanket. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours, hadn't eaten a real meal in longer than that, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw those men, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy blanket. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours, hadn't eaten a real meal in longer than that, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw those men, heard Rick's desperate voice, felt the cold terror of almost losing everything. Tommy stirred, blinking awake. "Dad, can we go home now?" Home. Their pathetic shack that leaked when it rained, where the heater barely worked, where they'd been found so easily. It wasn't safe anymore, if it ever had been. "Not yet, buddy. The police still have questions." "About the bad men?" "Yeah." Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing this in that way children did, accepting the unacceptable because they had no other choice. "Is Lily okay?" "I hope so." She was really scared. In the woods, she was crying but trying to be quiet about it. Daniel reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "You were brave out there. You helped keep her calm." "Mom would have done the same thing, right? Helped them?" The question hit Daniel unexpectedly hard. Sarah would have done exactly the same thing, would have thrown herself between danger and innocence without a second thought. It was one of the things he'd loved most about her, that fierce protective instinct that extended beyond just their own family. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "She would have." The door opened and Walsh returned, but she wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit followed her, not one of Webb's thugs, but someone official, radiating authority and barely contained anger. "Mr. Moore," the man said without preamble, "I'm Assistant District Attorney James Crawford. We have a problem." Daniel straightened, instantly on alert. "What kind of problem?" Crawford dropped a folder on the table, photos spilling out. They were surveillance images from various cameras around town, Daniel at the harbor, at the church, in the stolen van. But there were other photos too, older ones. Daniel with Eddie, his cousin. Daniel at the docks where Eddie kept his boat. Daniel at places and times that suddenly looked suspicious when laid out like evidence. "Your cousin Edward Moore," Crawford said coldly, "is currently under federal investigation for smuggling, drugs, weapons, possibly human trafficking. And here you are, running from crime scenes, stealing vehicles, associating with known criminals like Rick Sampson, and now trying to get to Eddie's boat with a woman who claims someone's trying to kill her. Wait, Daniel said, his mind reeling. Eddie's smuggling? No, he runs fishing charters. A convenient cover, Crawford interrupted. And you expect us to believe you knew nothing about it? That it's just coincidence you were trying to reach him with Mrs. Sterling and her daughter? Daniel felt the floor dropping out from under him. This was how it happened, how innocent people got tangled in things they didn't understand. He looked at Tommy, who was watching with wide, frightened eyes. I was trying to help them get to Boston, Daniel said. That's all. I didn't know about Eddie. Save it, Crawford cut him off. Here's what I think happened. Marcus Webb hired you to kidnap his ex-wife and daughter. The yacht explosion was meant to be a distraction while you grabbed them, but something went wrong. Maybe you got greedy, decided to ransom them yourself. So you ran. That's insane. Daniel stood up, the chair scraping back. I saved them. Or you staged a rescue to gain their trust. Crawford's smile was sharp as a knife. Mrs. Sterling is a billionaire. Even a small ransom would set you up for life. And with your history, behind on rent, can't feed your son, desperate for money, who could blame you for being tempted? You son of a... Daniel started forward, but Walsh stepped between them. That's enough, she said firmly. Both of you. But Daniel saw something in Walsh's eyes. Doubt. She was starting to wonder if Crawford might be right. After all, what were the odds? A broke fisherman just happens to save a billionaire? Just happens to have a smuggler cousin with a boat? Just happens to be at the right place at the right time? I want to see Catherine, Daniel said. Let her tell you. Mrs. Sterling is being questioned separately, Crawford said, and her story is evolving. Daniel's blood went cold. What does that mean? It means she's now suggesting that perhaps she was confused, that the yacht explosion might have been an accident, that perhaps she overreacted due to trauma. He got to her, Daniel said immediately. Webb got to her somehow, threatened her. Or, Crawford said smoothly, she realized that accusing one of the state's most powerful men of attempted murder without evidence wasn't wise, especially when the only witness to support her story is a man connected to a smuggling ring. Daniel sank back into his chair, understanding the trap that was closing around him. Webb had reach everywhere, just like Catherine had said. Even here, even in police custody, he could apply pressure, make threats, turn the narrative. Tommy tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Dad, why is the man being mean to you? Before Daniel could answer, the door burst open. A woman strode in, mid-40s, sharp-featured, with the kind of confidence that came from fighting battles and winning. She wore jeans and a blazer, press credentials hanging from her neck. Amanda Chen, Boston Globe, she announced, then looked directly at Daniel. Don't say another word. Crawford's face flushed red. This is a closed interview. How did you... Catherine Sterling called me an hour ago, Chen said, pulling out her phone and showing a recording app already running. Told me everything. The attempted murder, Marcus Webb's involvement, the cover-up that's happening right now in this police station. She looked at Crawford with undisguised contempt. James Crawford, isn't it? Interesting that you're here. Isn't your law firm representing Sterling Industries in their merger negotiations? Crawford went pale. That's completely separate. Is it? Chen turned to Walsh. Detective, are you aware that ADA Crawford has a clear conflict of interest here? That he should have recused himself the moment Catherine Sterling's name came up? Walsh looked between them, and Daniel saw her making connections, understanding spreading across her face. I think, Walsh said slowly, we need to call the FBI. You don't have jurisdiction, Crawford started. Interstate kidnapping, attempted murder on federal waters, conspiracy involving multiple states, Chen rattled off. Oh, the FBI will be very interested. In fact, she held up her phone, showing an email. They're already on their way. Special Agent Martinez and her team should be here in about 20 minutes. Crawford grabbed his folder, shoving the photos back inside. This isn't over. No, Chen agreed pleasantly. It's just beginning. And tomorrow's headline is going to be fascinating. ADA tries to frame hero father who saved billionaire and child. That'll play well in the morning edition. Crawford stormed out, and Daniel felt like he could breathe again. But Chen wasn't done. She turned to him, her expression serious. Catherine told me what you did. risking everything to save them. But she also told me to give you a warning. Marcus has judges, cops, politicians in his pocket. Right now, you and your son are the only witnesses he can't buy or threaten into silence. That makes you valuable. It also makes you targets. We're already targets, Daniel said tiredly. They threatened Tommy's school. Chen's expression hardened. They what? Daniel explained about the video, the threat to Tommy's safety if he didn't walk away. Chen recorded all of it, her face growing angrier with each detail. Threatening a child, she muttered. Even for Webb, that's low. Ms. Chen, Walsh interrupted. The FBI will want to interview everyone separately. You should know that. I'm not going anywhere, Chen said firmly, and neither are they, not until I know they're safe. She sat down across from Daniel, pulling out a tablet. While we wait for the FBI, tell me everything. From the beginning, don't leave anything out. So Daniel told it again, the whole story, while Chen typed rapidly, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Tommy had fallen asleep again, his head on Daniel's lap, and Daniel kept his voice low to avoid waking him. He was just getting to the part about the chase through the woods when the door opened again. This time it was Catherine and Lily, escorted by a female officer. Catherine looked exhausted, her borrowed clothes rumpled, but her eyes lit up when she saw them. Daniel, she said, relief evident in her voice. Lily broke free from her mother's hand and ran to Tommy, who had woken at the commotion. The two children hugged like old friends, trauma bonding them in ways that would probably last a lifetime. They tried to separate us, Catherine said, sitting down heavily. Said it would be better if we gave statements apart. Then Crawford showed up, started suggesting that maybe I was confused, that maybe... We know, Chen said. He tried the same thing here, only his angle was that Daniel was part of a kidnapping plot. Catherine's hand found Daniel's across the table. That's insane. He saved our lives. Webb's trying to control the narrative, Chen explained. If he can discredit you both, make it seem like a kidnapping gone wrong or a domestic dispute, then the attempted murder charges go away. But the yacht, Catherine started. Already being reported as an electrical fire, Chen said, showing them her phone with a news article. Tragic accident. No foul play suspected. Daniel felt rage building in his chest. He's going to get away with it. No, Chen said firmly. He's not. I've been investigating Marcus Webb for 3 years. I have sources, documents, recordings. What I haven't had is a witness brave enough to go on record. Until now. She looked at Catherine. If you're willing to tell your story publicly, if Daniel backs you up, we can expose him. Not just the murder attempt, but everything, the corruption, the connections to organized crime, the judges he owns. He'll come after us, Catherine said quietly, glancing at the children. He's already coming after you, Chen pointed out. The only question is whether you fight back or let him win. Before Catherine could respond, the door opened again. This time, it was a woman in a severe black suit, her badge identifying her as FBI Special Agent Rosa Martinez. She surveyed the room with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I understand we have a situation, she said simply. The next 2 hours were a blur of interviews, evidence collection, and phone calls. Martinez was thorough, professional, and completely immune to the political pressure that had corrupted the local investigation. She separated them all for individual interviews, but Daniel could tell she was taking their claims seriously. Tommy and Lily were taken to a comfortable room with toys and a child specialist, sparing them from the worst of the repetitive questioning. Daniel found himself going through the story yet again, this time with an FBI recorder running and Martinez taking detailed notes. The men we arrested aren't talking, Martinez said finally. But their phones are interesting. Multiple calls to and from Sterling Industries headquarters in the hours before the yacht explosion. Is that enough? Daniel asked. It's a start, but Marcus Webb didn't get where he is by being sloppy. We need more. There was a knock on the door and another agent entered, whispering something in Martinez's ear. Her expression darkened. What is it? Daniel asked. There's been a development, Martinez said carefully. Marcus Webb just held a press conference. He's claiming Catherine kidnapped their daughter, that she's mentally unstable, that she staged the yacht explosion for attention. Daniel's fists clenched. That's... I know, but he has doctors willing to testify about her mental state, employees who'll swear she's been acting erratically. He's even suggesting you're part of her delusion, that she convinced you she was in danger. So what do we do? Martinez stood. We protect you while we build our case. All of you are being placed in protective custody immediately. For how long? As long as it takes. Daniel thought about their shack, about Tommy's school, about what little life they'd managed to build. All of it would have to be abandoned now, left behind because they'd done the right thing. As if reading his thoughts, Martinez added, I know this is hard, but you saved 2 lives, Mr. Moore. That matters. They were moved quickly after that, bundled into unmarked FBI vehicles with tinted windows. Daniel held Tommy close as they drove through the city, watching familiar streets disappear, knowing they might never come back. Catherine and Lily were in the same vehicle, and the little girl was crying quietly, asking when they could go home. Catherine met Daniel's eyes over the children's heads, and he saw his own thoughts reflected there. What home? What life after this? The safe house was a nondescript apartment building in a part of the city Daniel had never been to. Their unit was on the 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen stocked with basic supplies. It was nicer than anywhere Daniel had lived in years, but it felt like a prison. This is temporary, the agent assigned to them said. His name was Brooks, young and earnest-looking. Once we have Webb in custody, if you get him in custody, Catherine corrected bitterly. Brooks didn't argue. They all knew how these things could go, how money and power could twist justice into shapes that served the wealthy. After Brooks left, promising to check in every few hours, the 4 of them stood awkwardly in the living room. It was strange, Daniel thought, how they'd been thrown together by violence and were now expected to play house while the world sorted itself out around them. I'm hungry, Tommy said in a small voice. Me too, Lily added. Normal needs in an abnormal situation. Daniel went to the kitchen, started looking through the cabinets. Let's see what we've got. He found pasta, jarred sauce, the basics for a simple meal. As he cooked, Catherine helped, moving around him in the small kitchen with surprising grace. The children sat at the table drawing with paper and crayons someone had thoughtfully provided. You know your way around a kitchen, Daniel observed as Catherine efficiently chopped vegetables he'd found in the fridge. I told you I didn't always have money. I cooked my way through college. Pasta every night because it was cheap and filling. What was your specialty? She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it. Gourmet dining for the perpetually broke. Tommy loves that, Daniel said, then felt awkward. They were talking like normal people, like they weren't in hiding from a murderous billionaire. Catherine seemed to sense his discomfort. It's okay to have normal moments, even in the middle of chaos. Especially then, actually. They ate dinner together at the small table, the children chattering about their drawings, creating elaborate stories about brave knights and magical princesses who defeated evil kings. Daniel caught Catherine wiping away tears as Lily described a princess who saved everyone with her magic boat. After dinner, they settled the children in one bedroom, Tommy and Lily insisting on keeping the door open and the hall light on. Daniel understood. After what they'd been through, darkness would never feel safe again. He and Catherine sat in the living room, exhausted but too wired to sleep. The TV was on, muted, showing news coverage of the yacht accident and Webb's press conference. Daniel watched Catherine's face as her ex-husband told lie after lie, painting her as unstable, dangerous, and unfit mother. I should have seen it, she said quietly, who he really was. But when you're in it, when someone's that good at manipulation, you doubt yourself instead of them. It's not your fault. I brought Lily into this. I married him, had a child with him, and now she's in danger because of my choices. You're protecting her, Daniel said firmly. That's what matters. What? Catherine looked at him, studying his face in the dim light from the TV. Why did you help us? Really? You could have walked away a dozen times. Daniel thought about the question, about all the moments when he could have chosen differently. My wife died 2 years ago, he said finally. Cancer. But before she died, she made me promise something. She made me promise I'd teach Tommy to be good, to help people, to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Maybe especially when it's hard. He paused, remembering Sarah's fierce eyes, the way she'd gripped his hand even as the morphine pulled her under. When I saw you and Lily in the water, I thought about Tommy losing me, having no one. I couldn't let that happen to another kid. Catherine reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, solid, real in a way nothing else had felt for the past 2 years. Sarah, she said, that was your wife's name? Yeah. Tell me about her. So he did. He talked about meeting Sarah at a church fundraiser, how she'd bid on his donated handyman services, and then made him fix everything in her apartment just to keep him around. How she'd laughed at his bad jokes, how she'd loved the ocean even though she couldn't swim, how she'd held Tommy for the first time and declared him perfect even though he looked like a grumpy old man. Catherine listened, really listened, and then told him about her father, the mechanic who'd believed his daughter could be anything, who'd worked 3 jobs to help pay for her MIT application fees, who died of a heart attack the day before her graduation. He never got to see what I became, she said softly. Never knew about the success, the money, any of it. He knew you, Daniel said. That's what mattered. They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands still linked, watching the muted news cycle through its lies and half-truths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, FBI interviews, media scrutiny, the constant threat of Webb's reach. But tonight, in this strange safe house, 2 broken families had found something unexpected. Not quite peace, but perhaps the possibility of it. We should sleep, Catherine said eventually, though she made no move to get up. Yeah, Daniel agreed, not moving either. Daniel? What happens when this is over? When Webb is arrested, or we testify, or however this ends? What happens to us? It was the question he'd been avoiding, the reality that their worlds were too different to overlap once the crisis passed. She was a billionaire. He was nobody. She lived in penthouses. He lived in a shack. Their connection was built on trauma and necessity, not anything sustainable. I don't know, he said honestly. Catherine squeezed his hand once more, then stood. Well, we'll face that when we come to it. For now, we survive. She headed to the bedroom where the children slept, pausing at the doorway to look back at him. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with the silent television and the weight of an uncertain future. He thought about Tommy, about the life they'd have to rebuild when this was over. He thought about Catherine and Lily, about connections forged in crisis that might not survive normal life. But mostly, he thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made, about teaching Tommy to be good. He'd kept that promise, he realized. Against all odds, despite everything, he'd stood up for what was right. The rest, the future, the possibilities, the complications, could wait until tomorrow. Daniel turned off the TV and headed to the couch that would be his bed for the foreseeable future. Through the thin walls, he could hear Catherine singing that haunting lullaby to the children, the same one from the church. It was beautiful and sad, and somehow perfect for this moment, this strange bubble of safety in a dangerous world. He closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him, and for the first time in 48 hours, Daniel Moore allowed himself to rest. The nightmare woke Daniel at 3 a.m, the same one he'd had since Sarah's death, but with new variations. This time, it wasn't Sarah drowning in the hospital bed, drowning in her own lungs while he watched helplessly. This time, it was Catherine and Lily in the water, Tommy being dragged away by men in suits, and his hands unable to reach any of them. He sat up on the couch, sweat cooling on his skin, and saw a small figure standing in the hallway. Dad? Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. I had a bad dream. Daniel opened his arms, and Tommy ran to him, curling against his chest like he had when he was younger, before he'd decided he was too big for such things. They sat in the darkness, Tommy's small body shaking with leftover fear. Want to tell me about it? Daniel asked. The bad men came back. But this time you weren't there. Daniel held him tighter. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. A door opened down the hall and Catherine emerged, Lily on her hip. The little girl was crying quietly, her face buried in her mother's neck. Catherine's eyes met Daniel's in the dim light from the window, and without words, she came to sit beside them on the couch. The 4 of them huddled together, 2 families made one by circumstance and fear. Mommy, Lily whimpered, when can we go home? I don't know, sweetheart. I miss my room. I miss Mrs. Butterworth. Who's Mrs. Butterworth? Tommy asked, genuinely curious. My cat, Lily said, peeking out from her mother's shoulder. She's orange and fat and likes to sleep on my bed. I always wanted a cat, Tommy said wistfully, but our landlord doesn't allow pets. Daniel felt that familiar stab of inadequacy. All the things he couldn't give his son piling up like debts he'd never be able to pay. But Catherine surprised him. When this is over, she said carefully, maybe you can visit Mrs. Butterworth. She loves children. Really? Tommy's eyes went wide. Really? It was a small promise, probably meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but Daniel saw how it lit up his son's face. Sometimes small promises were all you had to hold on to. They sat together until the children fell back asleep, then carefully carried them back to bed. Daniel and Catherine returned to the living room, neither able to return to sleep themselves. Coffee? Daniel offered. God, yes. He made it strong, the way Sarah had liked it, and they sat at the small kitchen table as dawn began to creep through the windows. The normal sounds of a city waking up filtered through: car engines, distant sirens, the rumble of a garbage truck. It seemed impossible that the world was just continuing as if nothing had happened. Agent Brooks will be here soon, Catherine said, checking the burner phone the FBI had given her. Martinez wants to go over our testimony again before the grand jury. The grand jury. It had been 3 days since they'd been moved to the safe house. 3 days of intense preparation for the testimony that would either put Marcus Webb behind bars or leave them all exposed to his revenge. The FBI had built a strong case, but everything hinged on their testimony being believed. Are you ready? Daniel asked. To face him? No, but I'll do it anyway. She paused, then added, He'll be there, watching. He likes to intimidate witnesses with his presence. Daniel had never met Marcus Webb in person, had only seen him on TV and in newspaper photos, but he'd felt the man's reach, his influence, the casual way he wielded power like a weapon. Let him watch, Daniel said. We'll tell the truth. Catherine smiled sadly. You still believe the truth matters? It has to. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. 3 short, 2 long, the pattern Brooks had told them to expect. Daniel checked the peephole anyway, confirming it was the young agent before opening the door. Brooks entered quickly, followed by Agent Martinez and, surprisingly, Amanda Chen. Ms. Chen insisted on being here, Martinez said with slight disapproval. She says she has new information. Chen didn't waste time with pleasantries. She pulled out her tablet, showing them a document. My source at Sterling Industries came through. These are internal emails from the night before the yacht explosion. Marcus Webb explicitly discussing permanent solutions to the Catherine problem. Daniel read over Catherine's shoulder, his stomach turning at the casual way murder was discussed in corporate speak. Liability elimination. Risk mitigation. Permanent resolution of custody dispute. This is it, Catherine breathed. This proves premeditation. It proves he wanted you gone, Martinez corrected. It doesn't directly link him to the explosion, but it helps. The grand jury will find it very interesting. There's more, Chen said, swiping to another document. 3 weeks ago, Marcus took out a life insurance policy on Lily. $50 million, with himself as sole beneficiary. Catherine went pale. He insured our daughter's life? It gets worse. The policy specifically covers accidental death at sea. The room went silent as the implications sank in. Marcus Webb hadn't just been willing to risk his daughter's life. He'd planned to profit from it. The monster, Catherine whispered, and Daniel saw her hands shaking. He reached over and covered them with his own, offering what comfort he could. This changes everything, Martinez said, already on her phone. I need to get this to the prosecutor immediately. We leave for the courthouse in 1 hour. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Brooks had brought clothes for them to wear to court, a suit for Daniel that almost fit, a conservative dress for Catherine. They looked like they were playing dress-up, Daniel thought, children pretending to be adults in a game they didn't understand. Tommy and Lily would stay at the safe house with another agent, much to both children's distress. I want to come with you, Tommy insisted, clinging to Daniel's hand. I know, buddy, but this is grown-up stuff, boring grown-up stuff. Will you come back? The question broke Daniel's heart. His 6-year-old son had already learned that parents didn't always come back. "I'll come back," Daniel promised. "We both will." The ride to the courthouse was tense. 2 FBI vehicles with darkened windows taking a circuitous route to avoid any potential ambush. Daniel sat beside Catherine in the back seat, both of them silent, lost in their own thoughts. "Whatever happens," Catherine said suddenly, "I want you to know that meeting you has been—" She stopped, searching for words. "You restored my faith in people. In goodness." "Catherine, no, let me finish. If something happens, if Marcus finds a way to win, I need you to know that I've already changed my will. You and Tommy will be taken care of, always." Daniel felt uncomfortable with the idea of her money, of being taken care of. "We don't need—" "It's not about need. It's about making sure Tommy gets every opportunity, every chance to become the man his father is teaching him to be." Before Daniel could respond, they were at the courthouse, being hustled through a side entrance to avoid the media circus at the front. The hallway was narrow and smelled of old wood and floor wax, the kind of governmental smell that made Daniel think of his wife's death certificate, of custody hearings he'd attended as a foster kid. They were led to a waiting room where the prosecutor, a stern woman named Patricia Reeves, went over their testimony one more time. She was thorough, professional, but Daniel could see the excitement in her eyes. This was the case that would make her career if she could pull it off. "Remember," Reeves said, "just tell the truth. Don't elaborate, don't speculate. Answer only what's asked." "And if they ask about Eddie," Daniel said, "his cousin had been arrested 2 days ago. The FBI raid on his boat, finding enough evidence to put him away for years. Another casualty of Daniel's attempt to help." "Tell the truth. You didn't know about his activities. The grand jury will believe that. Your financial records show someone barely surviving, not someone profiting from smuggling." It was meant to be reassuring, but Daniel felt the sting of it anyway. His poverty was so obvious that it served as proof of his innocence. "They're ready for you," an assistant said from the doorway. The grand jury room was smaller than Daniel had expected, wood-paneled and windowless, with 23 citizens sitting in tiered rows like a tiny amphitheater. They looked normal, Daniel thought, like people he might see at the grocery store or the bank. Regular people about to decide if a billionaire should stand trial for attempted murder. Daniel testified first, walking through the night of the storm, the rescue, the chase that followed. The jurors listened intently, some taking notes, others just watching him with unreadable expressions. When he described Tommy being threatened, several jurors shifted uncomfortably, parents recognizing a parent's worst nightmare. Then it was Catherine's turn. She was composed, articulate, walking the jury through her marriage to Marcus, the divorce, the custody battle that had turned vicious. When she reached the part about the yacht, about Lily saying her father had been there, her voice cracked, but didn't break. "He put our daughter on that yacht knowing it was going to explode," she said clearly. "He was willing to murder his own child to get to me." The life insurance policy was introduced, causing several jurors to gasp. The emails Chen had found were presented, each one more damning than the last. By the time the prosecutor finished, the room felt charged with anger and disgust. But then the door opened and Marcus Webb walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. Grand jury proceedings were typically closed, but somehow he'd gotten permission to observe. He sat in the back row, his presence filling the room like a toxic cloud. Daniel felt Catherine tense beside him, and he moved slightly, positioning himself between her and her ex-husband. Webb was smaller than Daniel had expected, but his eyes were exactly as cold as Catherine had described. They were shark eyes, dead and calculating, taking in everything and giving nothing back. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Daniel had made in the last 5 years, and he sat with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything. "Does the defense have any questions?" the judge asked. Webb's lawyer stood, a silver-haired man who looked like he'd been born in a courtroom. "Just a few clarifications, Your Honor." What followed was a masterclass in legal manipulation. The lawyer didn't directly challenge their testimony, but planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. Catherine's mental state during the divorce was questioned. Daniel's financial desperation was highlighted. The connection to Eddie's smuggling operation was explored in detail that made it sound more sinister than coincidental. "Mr. Moore," the lawyer said smoothly, "you were behind on rent, unable to feed your child, desperate for money, correct?" "I was struggling, yes." And suddenly a billionaire washes up on your beach. How fortuitous. I didn't know who she was when I saved her. So you say. But you certainly found out quickly enough. And then you tried to take her to your cousin, a known criminal. I didn't know about Eddie's. You didn't know your own cousin was a smuggler? Someone you were close enough to that he owed you favors? Daniel felt the trap closing but didn't know how to escape it. Every truth he told was being twisted, made to look like lies. And Mrs. Sterling, the lawyer continued, turning to Catherine, you've been under psychiatric care during the divorce, haven't you? My husband was gaslighting me. The therapy was to help me deal with, just answer the question, have you been under psychiatric care? Yes. Taking medication for anxiety and depression? Yes, but experiencing paranoid thoughts, according to your husband's testimony? Catherine's jaw tightened. According to my ex-husband, who's trying to kill me. Allegedly trying to kill you. Though isn't it convenient that the only witnesses to this alleged plot are a desperate man who needed money and a woman with a documented history of mental health issues? Daniel couldn't stand it anymore. He threatened my son, he said loudly, ignoring the prosecutor's warning look. They had video of him at school. They knew his teacher's name, his schedule. What kind of people do that? The lawyer smiled coldly. The kind of people a paranoid woman might imagine, Mr. Moore, or the kind of story a desperate man might invent to explain why he was fleeing with a kidnapped heiress and her daughter. That's not... Thank you, Mr. Moore. No further questions. The lawyer sat down, and Daniel felt the mood in the room shift. The certainty that had been there before was now clouded with doubt. Some jurors were looking at them differently, seeing not victims, but possibly conspirators. Marcus Webb stood to leave, and as he passed their table, he paused. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. His presence, his confidence, his smile, they all said the same thing. I own this world, and you're nothing in it. Then he was gone, and the grand jury began deliberations. Daniel, Catherine, and their legal team were led back to the waiting room. Reeves tried to be optimistic, but Daniel could see she was worried. It could go either way, she admitted. Webb's lawyer is good, very good. But the evidence, Catherine started, is circumstantial, strong but circumstantial. And Webb has spent years building his reputation. Philanthropist, business leader, pillar of the community. It's hard for people to believe someone like that is capable of murder. They waited 3 hours. 3 hours of pacing, of drinking bad coffee, of Catherine calling to check on the children every 20 minutes. 3 hours of Daniel wondering if he'd just made everything worse by trying to help. Finally, a clerk appeared. They've reached a decision. Back in the grand jury room, the foreman stood. He was an older black man with kind eyes that wouldn't quite meet theirs. We find that there is insufficient evidence to indict Marcus Webb on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, or child endangerment. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Beside him, Catherine made a small sound, like all the air had been driven from her lungs. However, the foreman continued, and Daniel's heart lifted slightly. We do find sufficient evidence to indict Mr. Webb on charges of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and racketeering related to the subsequent chase and threats against Mr. Moore and his son. It was something, but not enough. Webb would face charges, but not for the yacht, not for trying to kill his own daughter. The lesser charges might get him a few years in minimum security if they could even make them stick. His lawyers would probably get him off with probation and fines he could pay from pocket change. As they were escorted out, Daniel saw Webb in the hallway, surrounded by his legal team and already spinning the story for the media. He was shaking hands, looking grave but vindicated, playing the role of the falsely accused man who'd maintained his dignity throughout the ordeal. This is a victory for truth, Webb was saying to the cameras. While I regret that my ex-wife's mental health issues have led to these false accusations, I'm gratified that the grand jury saw through them. My primary concern now is the welfare of my daughter. Daniel felt Catherine stiffen beside him, and he grabbed her arm before she could lunge at Webb. Don't, he whispered. That's what he wants. They were hustled out the side entrance and back into the FBI vehicles. The ride to the safe house was silent, Catherine staring out the window with empty eyes. The fight drained out of her. When they arrived, Tommy and Lily ran to them, and Daniel saw Catherine force herself to smile, to pretend everything was okay for her daughter's sake. They ate dinner, takeout pizza that tasted like cardboard, and watched a movie the kids picked, some animated thing about brave princesses and noble knights that felt like mockery given their situation. After the children were asleep, Daniel found Catherine on the small balcony of the safe house, staring at the city lights. "He won," she said flatly. "He always wins. The other charges won't stick. His lawyers will delay, appeal, find technicalities. Even if by some miracle he's convicted, he'll get a slap on the wrist. And meanwhile, he'll be fighting for custody of Lily, painting me as an unfit mother who made false accusations." Daniel didn't know what to say because she was probably right. The system was built for people like Webb, built to protect wealth and power. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you from this." Catherine turned to him, and he was surprised to see she was crying. "You did save us. That night in the storm, you saved us. Everything else. This is just the world being what it's always been." She moved closer to him, and suddenly they were holding each other, two broken people trying to keep each other from falling apart completely. Daniel could feel her tears soaking his shirt, could feel her body shaking with suppressed sobs. "We'll figure something out," he said, though he had no idea what. "There's nothing to figure out," Catherine said against his chest. "I'll keep running, keep hiding, keep Lily away from him as long as I can. Maybe Amanda Chen can publish enough to damage his reputation, make him back off. Maybe." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the city went about its business below, oblivious to their pain. Finally, Catherine pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I should go to bed," she said. "Catherine, thank you," she said, cutting him off, "for everything, for being the one good person in all of this." She went inside, leaving Daniel alone with the night and his thoughts. He stayed on the balcony for another hour, trying to think of solutions, of ways to fight back against someone like Webb. But every path led to the same conclusion. Sometimes the bad guys won. Sometimes being good wasn't enough. When he finally went inside, he found Tommy awake on the couch, clutching his stuffed bear. "Dad, are we safe now?" Daniel sat beside his son, pulling him close. "We're together. That's what matters. But the bad man is going to face some consequences. Maybe not all the ones he deserves, but some." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Lily's scared. She told me her dad is mean, that he yells and throws things." "She told you that?" "Yeah, she said her mom cries a lot because of him." Tommy looked up at Daniel with those innocent eyes. Why do some dads be mean to their families? Daniel thought about how to answer that, how to explain evil to a 6-year-old who still believed in justice and happy endings. "I don't know, buddy. Some people are broken inside in ways that make them hurt others. But you know what?" "What?" "There are more good people than bad, and good people look out for each other." "Like you looked out for Catherine and Lily." "Like that, yeah." Tommy seemed to consider this. "I'm glad you're my dad," he said finally. "You're one of the good ones." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Thanks, buddy. You're pretty good yourself." They sat together in the darkness, father and son, while somewhere in the city Marcus Webb was probably celebrating his victory. But Daniel realized something in that moment. Webb might have won the legal battle, but he hadn't broken them. They were still here, still together, still standing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The FBI would decide how long to maintain protective custody. Catherine would have to figure out her next move. Daniel would have to decide whether to return to their old life or try to build something new. But tonight, his son felt safe. Tonight, 2 children slept peacefully despite the chaos around them. Tonight, 4 people who'd been strangers a week ago had become something like a family. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. The sound of sirens drifted up from the street, the city's nightly symphony of crisis and response. Daniel closed his eyes and thought about Sarah, about what she would have made of all this. She would have been proud, he thought. Proud that he'd stood up. Proud that he'd tried. Proud that he'd taught their son through actions rather than words, that doing the right thing mattered even when it cost everything. "Dad," Tommy said sleepily, "can we stay here? All of us together?" "We'll see, buddy. We'll see." But even as he said it, Daniel knew their time together was running out. The safe house was temporary. The protection was temporary. Soon they'd have to return to their separate worlds, Catherine to her billions and her battles, Daniel to his poverty and his struggles. Unless they found another way. Unless they chose to forge a different path, one that Marcus Webb couldn't predict or control. The thought flickered in Daniel's mind like a candle in the darkness, fragile but persistent. The morning came too soon, bringing with it Agent Martinez and news that shattered their fragile peace. She stood in the safe house living room, her expression grim, holding a folder that Daniel knew contained nothing good. "The FBI is ending protective custody," she said without preamble. "Orders from above. With Webb only facing minor charges and no immediate threat proven, we can't justify the resources." Catherine went pale. "But he tried to kill us." "Allegedly, and a grand jury disagreed. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied. You have 48 hours to make arrangements." Daniel felt the floor drop out from under him. 48 hours. After that, they'd be on their own, exposed, vulnerable to whatever Webb planned next. "This is insane," Catherine said, her voice rising. "You know what he's capable of." "I know what I suspect," Martinez corrected, "but suspicion isn't enough. The Bureau has protocols, and without an indictment for attempted murder—" She spread her hands helplessly. "So we're just supposed to wait for him to try again?" Daniel asked. "Wait until he succeeds?" Martinez pulled a business card from her pocket. "This is a private security firm. They're expensive, but good. And Miss Chen has indicated the Globe will maintain coverage of your story, which provides some protection through publicity." She left after that, leaving them stunned in her wake. Tommy and Lily were in the bedroom playing, blissfully unaware that their world was about to shatter again. "I have money for security," Catherine said mechanically. "I can hire bodyguards, find a safe place for us to stay." "Us?" Daniel asked. She looked at him, and he saw the question in her eyes that she didn't voice. Were they an us? This thrown-together family that existed only in crisis? Before either could answer, Daniel's burner phone rang. The only people who had the number were the FBI and Amanda Chen. The display showed Chen's number. "Daniel, you need to see something," Chen said without greeting. "Can you get to a computer?" There was a laptop in the safe house, basic but functional. Daniel opened it as Chen directed him to a secure link she'd sent. What loaded made his blood run cold. It was a website, professionally designed, expensively produced. The truth about Catherine Sterling blazed across the top, and below were documents, photos, medical records that should have been confidential. Page after page painting Catherine as unstable, dangerous, a mother who'd endangered her own child with wild conspiracy theories. "He's destroying me," Catherine whispered, reading over Daniel's shoulder. How did he even get some of this?" "Money buys a lot of access," Chen said through the phone. "But here's the interesting part. The metadata on these documents shows they were compiled weeks ago, before the yacht explosion." Daniel felt Catherine stiffen beside him. "He was planning this even before he tried to kill me?" "He was planning for every contingency," Chen confirmed. "If you died, fine. If you survived and accused him, he had this ready to discredit you. The man doesn't leave anything to chance." Catherine sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "It's over. Even if I fight the custody case, no judge will side with me after seeing this. He'll get Lily, and then she has an accident," Daniel finished grimly. "That life insurance policy is still active." They sat in heavy silence, the weight of their helplessness crushing. Webb had won before the fight even started, had anticipated every move and countered it before they could make it. "There might be another way," Chen said slowly through the phone. "It's crazy, probably illegal, definitely dangerous. But Webb has one weakness, his ego. He needs to be seen as the victim, the noble father fighting for his child. What if we gave him exactly what he wants?" "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "I mean, you disappear. Really disappear. Take Lily and vanish completely. New identities, new lives, somewhere Webb can't reach." "That's kidnapping," Daniel pointed out. "She'd be taking Lily from her legal father." "Only if she gets caught," Chen said. "I know people who specialize in this, helping abused women escape. It's not legal, but sometimes legal isn't the same as right." Catherine was already shaking her head. "I can't live looking over my shoulder forever," And Lily, what kind of life would that be for her? Alive, Daniel said quietly. It would be alive. His words hung in the air, stark and true. Catherine looked at him, then at the bedroom where their children played. I need to think, she said finally. Chen promised to call back later with more information if Catherine wanted it, then hung up. Daniel and Catherine sat in the silent apartment, each lost in thought. The sound of the children's laughter drifted from the bedroom, a painful reminder of innocence that needed protecting. Would you come? Catherine asked suddenly. Daniel looked at her, surprised. What? If I took Lily and disappeared, would you and Tommy come with us? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. She was asking him to give up everything, his life, his identity, his son's future, to run with her, to become fugitives together. Catherine, I know it's insane. I know I have no right to ask, but these past days, the four of us together, it's felt like... She stopped, struggling for words. Like family. Like what family should be. Daniel thought about their shack by the harbor, about Tommy's school where he was finally making friends, about the life they'd scraped together from nothing. Then he thought about Tommy and Lily playing together, about Catherine singing lullabies to both children, about the way she'd held his hand during the grand jury testimony. I need to think too, he said. She nodded, understanding, and they went back to their separate turmoil. Daniel made lunch for the children, sandwiches and apple slices, normal food for an abnormal day. Tommy chattered about a game he and Lily had invented, something involving pirates and treasure and brave knights saving princesses. Lily had come out of her shell over the past few days, the trauma of the yacht fading under Tommy's gentle friendship. Mr. Daniel, Lily said suddenly, are you my daddy now? The question stopped him cold. Catherine, who'd been washing dishes, dropped a plate. It didn't break, but the clatter was loud in the sudden silence. No, sweetheart, Daniel said carefully. I'm Tommy's dad. Your dad is... My dad is mean, Lily said matter-of-factly. He yells and breaks things. Tommy says you never yell. Sometimes I yell, Daniel admitted, glancing at Tommy, who shrugged. Only when I do something really bad, Tommy said, like when I tried to cook eggs by myself and almost burned the house down. That was dangerous, Daniel said, remembering the terror of finding his 5-year-old standing on a chair at the stove, flames licking at a dish towel. But you didn't hit, Tommy pointed out. And you didn't break things. You just hugged me really tight and said you were scared. Lily looked between them with those two wise eyes the children got when they'd seen too much. My daddy hits walls. Sometimes he throws stuff at Mommy. Catherine made a sound from the kitchen, half sob, half rage. Daniel reached over and squeezed Lily's small hand. That's not okay, he said firmly. Daddies shouldn't do that, ever. Will he find us here? Lily asked, and the fear in her voice broke Daniel's heart. No, he lied. You're safe here. But even as he said it, he knew their safety was an illusion that would shatter in 36 hours when the FBI protection ended. Webb would find them, maybe not immediately, but eventually. And when he did, what would happen to this little girl who was already so afraid of her father? That afternoon, while the children napped, exhausted from emotional upheaval they didn't fully understand, Daniel found Catherine on the balcony again. She was on the phone with her lawyer, and from her expression, it wasn't going well. He's filed an emergency custody motion, she said after hanging up, claiming I'm a flight risk, that I've been hiding Lily from him. The hearing is tomorrow. Can you fight it? With what? He has documentation that I'm unstable, that I make false accusations. He has witnesses who'll swear I've been erratic. My own psychiatrist's notes, twisted out of context. She laughed bitterly. He probably has the judge in his pocket, too. Daniel made a decision then, one that would have seemed insane a week ago, but now felt like the only sane choice in an insane situation. We run, he said. Catherine looked at him. We? All four of us. Chen's right. Sometimes legal isn't the same as right. Webb might own judges and cops, but he doesn't own everything. We take the kids and disappear. You do that? Give up your life for us? Daniel thought about what life meant. Was it the place you lived, the job you worked, the routine you followed? Or was it the people you protected, the children you raised, the choice to stand for something even when it cost everything? What life? He said. I've been surviving, not living. Just getting through each day since Sarah died. But this week, with you and Lily, it's been different. It's been real, Catherine finished. It's felt real. They stood close together, the city sprawled below them, and Daniel felt something shift between them. Not quite love, it was too soon, too complicated for that. But possibility. The possibility of something more than survival. How do we do it? Catherine asked. How do we disappear? Chen knows people, and I know some folks from the docks, people who live off the grid, who could help us get started. We'd need cash, lots of it. I can get cash. Not for my main accounts, but I have emergency funds Webb doesn't know about. Maybe 300,000 I could access without raising flags. 300,000. It was more money than Daniel had ever imagined having, enough to disappear, to start over, to build something new. When? He asked. Tonight, after midnight. The FBI surveillance will be lighter, and Webb won't expect us to run while we're still technically in protective custody. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning, working out details in whispered conversations while the children played. Catherine would withdraw the cash in small amounts from different ATMs. Daniel would contact Chen about the people who could provide new identities. They'd need a car, supplies, a destination. Where do we go? Catherine asked. North, Daniel said. Canada, maybe? Or west? Somewhere small, where cash still talks and people don't ask questions. As evening fell, they tried to act normal for the children. They ate dinner together, Chinese takeout that Brooks brought, their last meal in the safe house. Daniel watched Tommy teaching Lily to use chopsticks, both children giggling as noodles slipped and splattered. Catherine caught his eye across the table and smiled, a real smile despite everything. This was what they were fighting for. This moment, these children, this fragile connection that Webb would destroy if given the chance. After the children were asleep, Daniel and Catherine made their final preparations. She slipped out with Brooks' approval, he thought she was meeting with her lawyer, and returned 2 hours later with a backpack full of cash and a haunted expression. There was a man, she said quietly, following me. Not close enough to intervene, but watching. Webb's people. They're already moving. They had to go tonight. No more time for second thoughts or careful planning. At 1 a.m., Daniel woke Tommy gently. Hey, buddy, we're going on an adventure. Tommy blinked sleepily. Now? Now. It's a surprise adventure, but you have to be very quiet, okay? Tommy nodded, trust absolute in his eyes. Catherine was doing the same with Lily, whispering reassurances as she bundled the little girl in a coat. They slipped out of the safe house using the service stairs, avoiding the main elevator where cameras would record their departure. Daniel's heart pounded with each step, expecting alarms, shouts, the FBI agents to appear and stop them. But nothing happened. They reached the parking garage where Daniel had noticed an older Honda with dust on the windshield, a car that hadn't been moved in days. It took him less than 2 minutes to jimmy the lock and hotwire the engine. Skills learned in a misspent youth he'd never been proud of until now. You're stealing a car? Catherine whispered, shocked despite everything. Borrowing, Daniel corrected. We'll leave it somewhere safe with money for the owner. They drove out of the garage and into the Boston night. 4 fugitives in a stolen Honda, running toward an uncertain future. The children fell back asleep in the back seat, Lily's head on Tommy's shoulder. Catherine navigated using a paper map. No GPS that could be tracked, while Daniel drove, constantly checking mirrors for pursuit. They were 30 miles out of Boston when Catherine's burner phone rang. It was Chen. They know you're gone, the journalist said without preamble. The FBI just called me. There's an Amber Alert being issued for Lily. Webb's claiming you kidnapped her. Catherine's face went white. An Amber Alert. Every cop in the country will be looking for us. Get off the main roads, Chen advised. Ditch the car as soon as you can. I'm sending you coordinates for a truck stop where someone will meet you. They can help with new identities, but it'll cost. We have money. Good. And Catherine? Don't contact me again. They'll be monitoring everything now. The line went dead. Catherine looked at Daniel, fear naked on her face. "We can turn back," he said, though the words hurt to speak. "It's not too late." "Yes, it is," she said firmly. "The moment we ran, it became too late. We finished this." They pulled off at the next exit, finding a small town that looked half abandoned. The stolen Honda was left in a church parking lot with $5,000 in the glove compartment and an apology note. They walked through empty streets to a diner that Chen's contact had specified, the children stumbling along half asleep. The diner was one of those 24-hour places that existed outside of time, fluorescent lights humming over cracked vinyl booths. A woman sat in the corner booth, mid-40s, unremarkable except for the way her eyes tracked everything. "Catherine?" she said as they approached. "Yes." "I'm Maria. Chen sent you. Sit." They crowded into the booth, Tommy and Lily fully awake now and confused. "Daddy, what's happening?" Tommy asked. "We're taking a trip," Daniel said. "A long trip." Maria studied them all, her expression unreadable. 2 adults, 2 children. That's $100,000 for full packages. New identities, documents, everything you need to disappear. Catherine didn't hesitate, pulling stacks of bills from the backpack. Maria counted it with practiced efficiency, then nodded. "There's a van outside. Blue Ford. Keys are under the passenger seat. Drive to Buffalo. There's a motel called the Starlight on Route 20. Room 12 is ready. Your documents will be there in 3 days. After that, you're on your own." "That's it?" Daniel asked. "That's it. Except for advice. Cut the girl's hair, dye it. She's the one they're looking for most. The boy, too. Adults are easier to change, and ditch anything from your old life. Phones, credit cards, anything that connects you to who you were." She stood to leave, then paused. "Webb's people have already been asking around. You've got maybe a 12-hour head start. Use it wisely." Then she was gone, leaving them alone in the diner with 2 confused children and the weight of their choice. Daniel looked at Catherine, saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. "We can do this," he said, not sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Together?" "Together." They left the diner and found the van, exactly where Maria had said. It was older but well-maintained, with tinted windows and a full tank of gas. Daniel drove while Catherine studied the map, plotting a route that avoided major highways and toll booths with cameras. As dawn broke, they stopped at a Walmart in a small town whose name Daniel didn't catch. Catherine went in with the children, returning with hair dye, scissors, new clothes, basic supplies. In the van, she carefully cut Lily's beautiful long hair, the little girl crying as the locks fell away. "I'm sorry, baby," Catherine whispered, her own tears falling. "It's just for a little while." "I don't want to look different," Lily sobbed. "I want to go home." "We're going to a new home," Catherine said. "A better home." Tommy, watching this, suddenly spoke up. "I'll cut mine too," he said, "so Lily won't be alone." Daniel's throat tightened as his son showed a compassion beyond his years. "You sure, buddy?" "Yeah. We're a team, right?" So Daniel cut his son's hair too, watching the boy he'd raised transform into someone slightly different, older-looking somehow. Catherine dyed Lily's remaining hair from blonde to brown, then her own from rich chestnut to black. Daniel darkened his own hair, added glasses he didn't need, small changes that added up to new people. They drove through the day, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. The radio was full of news about the kidnapping, Webb playing the grieving father perfectly. Catherine turned it off when Lily started crying again. By evening, they reached Buffalo, finding the Starlight Motel exactly where Maria had promised. It was the kind of place that had seen better decades, but room 12 was clean and had 2 beds. They collapsed onto them, exhausted beyond measure. "What are our names now?" Tommy asked as they lay in the darkness. Daniel realized they hadn't thought that through. They'd need names for the documents, identities to practice. "What do you want to be called?" he asked his son. Tommy thought about it. "Can I be James, like James Bond?" Despite everything, Daniel smiled. "Sure, buddy, James it is." "I want to be Anna," Lily said quietly, "like the princess in Frozen." "Anna's perfect," Catherine said, "and I'll be, Rachel." Daniel considered his options. He needed something forgettable, common. David, he decided. David Walker. The Walker family, Catherine said, testing it out. Running a small business somewhere quiet, maybe Maine or Vermont. A fishing business, Daniel suggested. Something I actually know. I could do the books, Catherine offered. I do have a business degree, even if it's from another life. They were building a fantasy, Daniel knew, but it helped. It gave shape to the shapeless fear, turned running away into running toward something. The next 3 days passed in strange suspension. They stayed in the motel room, venturing out only for food, watching the news coverage of their disappearance with sick fascination. Webb was everywhere, pleading for his daughter's safe return, offering $1 million reward for information. $1 million, Daniel said. How long before someone recognizes us? The hair helps, Catherine said, but she looked worried too. On the third day, an envelope appeared under their door while they slept. Inside were driver's licenses, birth certificates, social security cards, all perfectly authentic looking. David and Rachel Walker, married 8 years. James Walker, age 6. Anna Walker, age 5. A complete family history manufactured from nothing. There was also a note. Head north, cross at Rainbow Bridge. Documents will pass inspection. Good luck. Canada. They were really doing this, leaving the country, leaving everything behind. That night, as they prepared to leave, Daniel found Catherine crying quietly on the bathroom floor. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her. What's wrong? Everything, she laughed through her tears. I'm dragging you and Tommy into this nightmare. I'm stealing my daughter from her father, even if he is a monster. I'm throwing away my entire life, my company, everything I built. You're saving Lily, Daniel reminded her, and you're not dragging us. We chose this. Why? She asked, looking at him with those green eyes that had seen too much. Why would you choose this? Daniel thought about how to answer, how to explain that sometimes life offered you a chance at something more than mere survival, and you had to take it even if it meant losing everything else. Because, he said finally, you and Lily gave us something we'd lost. Purpose, family, hope. That's worth more than any life we had before. Catherine kissed him then, soft and desperate and full of promise. When they pulled apart, something had changed between them, something that made them more than fellow fugitives. David Walker, she said with a small smile. I guess I'm stuck with you now. Rachel Walker, he replied. I guess you are. They left the motel at dawn, driving north toward the border, toward Canada, toward a new life built on lies but rooted in truth, the truth that family was what you chose to protect, not what blood or law demanded. As they approached the bridge, Daniel saw Tommy and Lily holding hands in the back seat, both children quiet but no longer crying. They'd adapted, as children do, accepting their new reality with a resilience that amazed him. Papers, please, the border guard said, and Daniel handed over their new documents with a steady hand that belied his racing heart. The guard examined them, scanned them, looked at the family in the van. For a moment, Daniel was certain he'd seen recognition in the man's eyes, that the game was over before it began. But then the guard handed back their papers. Welcome to Canada, Mr. Walker. Enjoy your visit. They drove across the bridge, leaving America behind, leaving Daniel Moore and Catherine Sterling behind. The Walkers entered Canada as the sun rose over Niagara Falls, the mist rising like hope itself. In the back seat, Tommy, now James, whispered to Lily, now Anna, about their new adventure. Catherine, now Rachel, reached over and took Daniel's, now David's, hand. They were fugitives. They were liars. They were running from a man who would never stop hunting